Hi, I'm Dr. Vince Bellonzi, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what scientists have recently found. It's very, very interesting. It really confirms what my mentors have been saying for years and years and years. I mean, 25, 30 years ago, I was listening to talks to people who are being called basically, quacks, kind of like the Galileo story, right? Eventually he was vindicated. But now the scientists are catching up. If you have been following the story of DNA, which is what we're going to talk about today, back in 2000 there was a rough draft of the sequence of the human DNA, which is pretty fantastic. It took supercomputers to be able to identify the sequence of these bases, A, G, C, T, and the thought was, or the theory was, that once we identified the sequence of human DNA, that we'd be able to identify monogenetic and other types of diseases. Basically, we'd find the gene for this and the gene for that. We'd find the diabetes gene, and we would do nanotechnology and alter it, and there'd be no more diabetes. And we'd find the gene for obesity, and we'd find the gene for cancer. We were going to eradicate disease. Not we, but science, right? And it really looked promising, especially as they completed the sequencing. That was around 2003. We really had the information intact. And scientists talked about the DNA coded for certain proteins. We knew that. But in between the sequencing that the computers did were these floating sequences that didn't fit right in. And they called them junk DNA, because when scientists don't know what something does, then they say it must not have a reason for existence. It wasn't really quite that bad. What they were referring to is the fact that, again, they didn't know what these other sequences did, so they were floating there. They seemed kind of random. Maybe they're just holding up space. So they call them junk DNA. Now they're trying to get away from that. It was kind of a mistake. It was a misquote. But what they found is that instead of the sequence of exons that they thought, instead of that sequence of DNA being the information that determined life and disease and all that, that's really in the junk DNA. Now this is very interesting. The sequences that were coded are really your body's template for manufacturing proteins. It's only about 1% of the DNA. And even if you try to expand on that, such a small percentage controlling all of life just doesn't make sense. It really goes to the junk DNA, which is 99%. Or depending on how you look at the encoding, you could go as high as 9-10% of the DNA making all the decisions for us. And again, more of a hardwired type theory instead of the fact that we do impact with lifestyle how things work. So they talk about hidden switches, and this has been referred to for a long time. Basically, it used to be believed that evolution was a process, and it took several generations to make a change, right? Mutation, such. And that's the Darwinian theory. Doesn't mean Darwin was all wrong, but we kind of took some license, made some assumptions, because it takes a long time to study evolution. You have to study generations, and that's why fruit flies and other organisms are used. But what they found is that, yeah, evolution per se does take generations to actually make that mutation or change in the DNA. But adaptation is a whole different story. And adaptation is what creates evolution. Adaptation can happen practically overnight, if not overnight. You can change the way that your body functions through an adaptation to the way you live your lifestyle. Now, the theory has been on my side of the fence, or people that I've been listening to, that we did play a part, that our lifestyle did absolutely make a difference, that it made a difference what you ate, how active you were. Your lifestyle had impact. And that's what this is saying. Because what they've discovered is commonly called epigenetic marks. There are processes called methylation and acetylation. Your body has a way to place marks on your DNA. And in a sense, it's a journal record of how your ancestors survived, right? We're here because our ancestors were able to adapt in the right way and get through whatever came. Environmentally, wars, whatever. They evolved, they adapted though, really, to survival, or to create a situation where they could survive. And they survived to beget us. We're here because they survived. They journaled in our DNA how they did it. We have that information, we carry it with us. Maybe someday we'll be able to actually have it written down and read it. But it's a journaling that allows us to live healthy and survive. So if you live, call it congruent, but if you live in the limits that your ancestors did, if you do more or less what they did, you're going to get their results, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, some of our ancestors went through very, very harsh times, and now they live, let's say, in abundance. Maybe our ancestor, maybe yours or mine, lived in a desert situation, not much to eat, and now there's a shopping place on every corner with abundant food. There's no worry. It could be the reverse as well. If your body had adapted to that harsh situation and then you give it too much, you could create a problem. And it does create a problem. Actually, there's studies confirming that. We'll talk more about that in another video. But basically, your ancestors placed epigenetic marks just like you would place a paper clip or a sticky note in a reference book. And you know how you look at a book that's been referenced a lot? Maybe something passed down through your family. Sometimes it's the Bible, sometimes it's other books. We're not getting into religion here, but a heavily referenced book will be marked up because people have been referring to it. It's been opened a lot, so a certain page will flop open. There's dog-eared places. There's probably a paper clip on sections that don't need to be looked at. There's maybe a sticky note or some other reference, something sticking out. Maybe there's just a bookmark inside the book, right? Well, your body, in a sense, does all these things. Or it was done before you were even here. And now your body's going to reference that. So it's really interesting that this is coming out in science. Several studies in Nature are bearing this out, and I've got a couple of the studies right here. But in this junk DNA, they actually found important signals for regulating genes, which means the determination of disease risk, height, eye color, hair color, complex aspects of biology, things that make us each different, make us more resilient, let's say, or degenerate us. It literally means that if you live your life in one way, you're going to have disease, you're going to have health problems, you're going to suffer. But if you live your life in a different way, you won't. It's black and white. Diabetes is recognized, at least the majority of type 2, and I'm talking over 90%, the majority of type 2 diabetics are recognized as a lifestyle created and driven disease. So most of the type 2 diabetics out there, this is exciting. I'm not saying they did, it's not about blaming anybody who has type 2 diabetes, but it's exciting that they can actually, by living the right lifestyle, turn it off. Get congruent with how their genes are set up so they don't have this diabetes situation, this loss of blood sugar control, which is really what diabetes is, and sugar can be dangerous and is. But if you change their lifestyle, the situation changes. I have worked with so many diabetics. And the ones that did the right thing, the ones that exercised, because exercise can control blood sugar, even independent of insulin, the ones that started watching more what they ate and didn't eat foods that impacted their blood sugar so much, actually saw a regaining control of diabetes, of their blood sugar levels. And they started reversing things that were coming because of that. Literally changing skin and collagen, changing the damage that had been done to their cardiovascular system through inflammation, changing what sugar had done to their mitochondria, what it had done to cells, the glycation end products. We talk about that in a whole class. Literally turning around and building a new body because of a lifestyle change. And that's what this is saying. These newly cataloged switches not only activate and deactivate genes, but also control how much of each protein gets made and when. Whether or not you make a protein that could lead to a problem, or a protein that's necessary to not have a problem. They are involved in the epigenetic changes. Remember, epigenetics is up above and around the genes, such as DNA methylation, acetylation, things that I just mentioned, which have become implicated in cardiovascular disease, cancer, and other conditions. This is from science. Published in Nature, and there's actually been a series of different research articles published on research done indicating that epigenetics is really the big thing. I'm so excited about this because it's really it's really fun when a theory that you've really subscribed to, and as I have, and as many scientists have, comes out with proof, right? It's kind of nice. And if you've ever heard of MD Anderson in Houston, right? The big cancer center, world renowned. They do a lot of good stuff. But even MD Anderson, I don't have it right here, but they just did a research study, and it was coupled with some twin studies and other things. And guess what they figured out, or what their conclusion was? 80% of the reasons for people's cancer was their lifestyle. 80%. This is cancer doctors. They didn't talk about genetics. Well, I mean, genetics are part of it, right? But it's epigenetics. Even in their studies, that's amazing that a cancer center like that, conventional thinking, is actually coming to the conclusion of how much you play a part. Of course, you can be exposed to carcinogens and things like that, but how you live your life will make a dramatic difference in whether or not you even experience cancer. And of course, the incidence and its aggressiveness. The new studies in cancer are really going toward a situation where we don't create an environment for cancer. We're just trying to wage war on it. How about if it never shows up in the first place? It's much easier instead of fighting it. So again, I'm really excited about this. It's really fun when you read these studies, you come across them, and again, they tend to reinforce theories that were kind of in place but not really validated all that well yet, just things that people were seeing early on. It's nice to have been acquainted with people that were ahead of their time. But the most exciting thing is what we do in the clinic. Because when I get somebody to change their lifestyle, to do things differently, and they come back and they tell me how much better they feel, that headaches they've had for years are gone, that symptoms over and over, allergies disappear, the things they were being, quote, treated for are just not there anymore. In fact, it's so much fun